Good morning everyone, welcome to our small footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. You'll have to excuse the location today. I'm inside my little grow space because it is really sunny out there, and the rooster's giving me a lot of trouble in where I normally film. And then I went over to the other garden and one of the pigs tried to get through the fence to me, so I've just had to bolt that back up, and it's been lots of fun. So I'm in here because I'm nice and secure in here and I don't have to worry about roosters or pigs or anything else. It just means that the lighting is a little bit wonky because I'm under shade cloth. But anyway, you'll have to deal with that. So, video today, I made caramelized onion jam. I've mentioned it quite a few times on the channel, and that every time I go shopping I buy an extra bag of onions with the intent to make some more caramelized onion jam up, and I never get to it. I finally got to it, which I'm happy to have done because we haven't had it on the shelf for ages and I really miss having it on the shelf. So I do have a video 18 months ago where I made it, but I thought I'd do an updated video making it again for all the newer viewers and all that sort of thing. So that's what I've done today, is the caramelized onion jam from start to finish and canning it to share it with you, because this is something that I really enjoy, and it's something that is one of those condiments on a shelf that can be used for so many different things. It's well worth putting on your shelf. So if you haven't tried it, I definitely suggest trying it. I do make an awfully big batch though, so you may want to reduce the ingredients just a touch. So today's video is caramelized onion jam. Alright, so as I said, I keep on buying bags of onions when I do my groceries with the intent to turn it into caramelized onion jam, and then just running out of time. It's very much an all-day canning project. Anyone who's ever caramelized onions knows that it takes quite a lot of time just to caramelize the onions. Like, disregarding everything else, the caramelizing of the onions themselves is a really lengthy process. So I used my new Thermomix cutter this time too. So the Thermomix cutter has two different sides. It has a grating side and a slicing side, and then a thick or a thin. So I used the thick slicing side for the onions, and that worked out pretty perfectly. It's not consistently sized because it depends on how I could fit the onion into the chute, but it's onion jam. It really doesn't matter. I'm not concerned with that at all. So I used the Thermomix cutter to do it. I worked out about how many cups of onion went into each full bowl. So when I cut it, I knew that how many onions sort of filled the cutter bowl, and then how many cups that worked out as, so that I could figure out how many cups of onion I was putting into my pans as well. So I put some ghee in the pan to start with. So you can use butter, ghee, oil, whatever you want. And you need to use just some, but you don't want to overdo it because you are canning this. But you do need to add some when you're starting the process. So I put the ghee in the pan to add the moisture until the onions start to sweat, because the whole point is that if you put the onions in dry, you'll get some charred bits, and you're not going for charred, you're going for caramelized. So by adding that bit of oil or butter or whatever else, that's going to help put moisture in the bottom of the pan so that the onions sweat and caramelize rather than charring up. I started out with the cast iron pan and then realized that it wasn't going to be anywhere near big enough, even if I used 2 pans to do this. The onions cook down a lot, like it makes a lot less product at the end, but the process of getting them to cook down, you've got quite a lot of ingredients initially. So I ended up moving to my stainless steel buffalo canning pot, which is the only large pot with a heavy base that I've got at the moment. I keep on saying I need to invest in a couple more pots, and I will eventually, but for the moment this is the only big heavy base, bottom based pot that I've got to use that's stainless steel. So I used that. I shredded them in batches and just kept on adding the batches to the pot as I went along, making sure to move them around in the pot and have them on sort of a medium heat, because as I said, we're trying to caramelize them, not burn them. So we don't want too much charring or any sort of dark colored burnt bits on the onion at all. We just want this nice caramelized color. So medium heat and long and slow. That's sort of what it is. It's a low, slow sort of a process. Once they're a really nice caramel color, and I totally could have taken them longer if I had wanted, but I was kind of running out of time and patience, to be honest, to do it. So you're going to keep on cooking them. Yeah, once you get all the onion in there, and then you keep on mixing it around so that you're not burning any on the bottom and getting that caramelization. you want to get it to the caramel that you want to. That's what it works out as. So the darker the color of the onions, the more caramelized they are, and which has its pros and cons. If you get too dark, you can have a little bit of a burnt caramel flavor, a little bit of a burnt sugar flavor if you take them too far, but also the texture changes a little bit. So sort of a mid-range caramel color is good because it leaves them sort of soft, with a nice bite to them, without having any more crunch, because the longer you caramelize them, the more liquid you're cooking out too, so your onions end up a little less moist, I suppose. So it's really up to you how far you want to take them, but this sort of caramel color, it could have gone a little bit further, but it was pretty good. So as I said, while I was slicing the onions, I had worked out how many cups I was using in the pot. So it ended up that I had 48 cups of onion in that big pot that I was cooking down, approximately. We've had this discussion before, or I've discussed this on here before, that cup measures in canning is really variable because it depends on how big you're cutting, what you're measuring in a cup. It depends on the cup that you're using, like American or Australian cup, or there's just so many variables with there. So it was approximately 48 cups of onion that I used. So you need to add a whole bunch of ingredients to this. Because we're going to water bath can it, it means that it needs a lot of things added to it. You can just pressure can caramelized onions. You could just pressure can these right at this point if you wanted, but it's a 45 minute, I think it's 40 minutes, I think, maybe, canning time, pressure canning time for caramelized onions. Whereas by turning it into caramelized onion jam, it's only a 15-minute canning time. So what I did was I added 2 cups of apple cider vinegar and 2 cups of balsamic vinegar. I added 2 tablespoons of salt, and I added a little drizzle of maple essence because I didn't have any maple syrup, and normally I would add some maple syrup to this, around about half a cup maybe. And then a good slug of molasses because I don't have any brown sugar made up, so I'm just going to add molasses and raw sugar, and it's 3 cups of raw sugar mixed into this quantity, this 48 cups of onion. And then you're going to mix it all up and you're going to let it simmer and reduce even further. So in this process, it's going to caramelize a little bit more. The sugars are going to caramelize as well as the onion, and it's going to get darker again. So again, this is another reason not to take it too far the first time, because you are going to let it reduce, caramelize, simmer, and do its thing for a bit longer, because what you're looking for is a really nice jammy texture. So you want it to be, well, it's called a caramelized onion jam. It's definitely not a jam. It's definitely not a gelatinous type structure to it. But once it's chilled, it does have an amalgamation sort of thing where the sauce that the onions are in holds it all together. And then it has that sweet tone to it as well as the onion. So you do take it down further into a jammy-like consistency, but you don't need to take it to like softball stage or anything like that. Just a nice sort of a decadent, glossy sort of a colour. That's really hard to describe. But you're going to simmer it down, it's going to change colour again, it's going to go deeper in colour, and it's going to have a jammy-like consistency when it's ready. And again, that's a little bit of personal preference as to where you want to take that. I am using 250ml lug lid jars, so they're about a cup worth of size, or a half pint sort of a size, because it's a good size for us in general for this product. It just means that we open a jar and use it within a week sort of thing in the fridge. It's a decent amount without being too much to make sure that we use it. Because it has all the vinegars and everything else in it, it does last quite a while once open in the fridge, like, I don't know, a couple of weeks probably. I don't think we've ever had a jar last that long in the fridge, but it would last quite a while in the fridge once opened. But at the same time, we like to use things that we open and put in the fridge as quickly as possible in the scheme of things, because I don't like having a dozen open jars in my fridge at a time. So the 250ml is around about the right size for us for that usage. I filled each jar up to where the thread starts and then went through and adjusted headspace as needed, because it's got so much texture to it. Sometimes it's really easy to overfill a jar when you're filling through a funnel. That whole judgment is hard to pick. And then I debubbled it with the back of a spatula. I still can't find my debubbling stick anywhere, my packing stick, my Fowler's packing stick anywhere, or the green one, the Ball Mason green one. No idea. So what I tend to use is a spatula shaft without the spatula head on it. It works quite well, and I use that to debubble the jam, the onions, whatever you want to call it, and then fixed up the headspace after that too, because things do settle when you debubble it. Sometimes your headspace drops and things like that. So then I topped up the jars as needed. I did clean the rims really well because, as you saw, it's got a lot of sugar in this recipe. So you want to make sure that any sort of tacky, sticky sensation is off the rims of the jars. Otherwise, you're going to have problems with your seal. So clean it really well with white vinegar. I also cleaned the inside of my lids with the cloth with white vinegar. Now these are brand new lids, and I had just washed them in warm water in the sink before using them, and then I wiped them out with the vinegar solution as well. That's just my personal preference. I like to do that. It's, you know, some people don't really like using vinegar on their lids and seals. They find it can cause issues. I personally do. So I wiped the inside of the lids out with vinegar as well. Now these lids are from Cospack. I get asked quite a lot about where I get some of my products from, my canning lids and things like that. So most of my lug lid jars and lids are from Cospack or Pack My Products or Green Living Australia or Plasdine. It just depends on where I am at the time, how much they're charging for them, and shipping. I compare. So like Pack My Products can be a little bit higher per item than say Cospack or Plasdine, but sometimes when I calculate the shipping out, if I'm getting them shipped out here directly, then it works out much the same anyway. So it's really, you know. So these 250ml jars use a standard 63ml lid. That standard 63ml lid fits most store-bought jam jars. Most store-bought, a lot of store-bought jars have 63ml lids, so that's nice and easy. So I always have a couple hundred of these lids for using with either the brand new jars or with shopping the grocery store jars that I have kept to use. 63ml is a fairly standard sort of a size lid for a lot of things. The molasses jars I think are 63ml as well. A lot of pasta jars, the ones that are sort of wider but they narrow at the top, they're normally 63ml jars. The other jar lids that I use a lot are the ones that fit the wide faceted jam jars. They're 82ml, or the 1 litre ghee jars, they're 82ml. So 82ml and 63ml are my most commonly used lids. And you can buy the lids on their own. You don't have to buy jars when you're shopping at like Pack My Products or Cospack and stuff like that. You can just buy lids. You don't have to buy jars as well. I decided to double stack water bath them. I probably should have used the Presto because it's a little bit smaller diameter, and the jars did have a little bit of room in this canner, but it wasn't enough that that anything was going to fall over, so that's fine. So I double stacked them. I put a full layer in the bottom on a rack, and then I put a rack in between and put a full layer on top, making sure, as I said, that nothing could really fall over. They will process if they fall over. That's not really an issue, but at the same time, it's not optimal. We want them upright if we possibly can. But when you look at the way a lot of European countries water bath can really bulk amounts of like tomato products, they lay all the jars down when they're doing it. So it does work, but optimally, you want them all upright and consistently spaced and things like that. So I put them all in there. Now I used a bucket and the shower water to fill the canner because the jars are warm. The product in the jars are warm, and so we want to use warm water. Now I could have just boiled a kettle and then split that with cold water, but we have an instant gas hot water in our shower, and we have a bucket because that's how we take the hot water to the sink for washing dishes at the moment. So all we did was filled the bucket in the shower and used a couple of buckets into the canner so that we were using warm water. Now the max temperature of that is 50 degrees, so it's not hot, but it's plenty warm enough that there's not going to be any temperature shock with the jars. So we fill that up, and you want it about 1.5 inches at a minimum above the height of the jars, and that's to allow for evaporation, and the turgidness, the movement of the water isn't coming away from the jars either. So I put the lid on, but I don't seal it. It's just placed on top, and that's going to help it get to temperature quicker, and it's going to help minimize evaporation. So placing a lid on one of your pots when you're water bath canning is always advisable for that purpose. Once it got up to a rolling boil, I started my timer. Now I do 15 minutes for these jars at over 1,000 feet elevation. It's said that 10 minutes under 1,000 feet is fine, but I'm over 1,000 feet, so it's 15 minutes for me. Once the timer has finished, I turn the heat off, and then I leave it for 5 or 10 minutes just to come off the boil and that sort of thing. And then I transfer all the jars to a board to rest for 24 hours, as you do with all the jars. Now, after the 24 hours, I check the seals. Now, these lids are really nice and easy to check because they have little pop tops in the middle of them, so it's really visibly obvious when they have sealed. But I have a lot of the jars without the pop tops as well, and a good way to test them, if you can't tell just by eyeballing it, is if you lay a pencil over the top of the lid, and if you look at the same height as the jar, you'll be able to see that it's concave underneath that pencil, that there's a gap. You can see past the pencil and the lid to the other side, and that's showing you that there's a concave space underneath there. But they also make a different sound. If you have a full jar that's properly sealed with one of these solid lids, and you tap on it, and then you tap on a jar that's not sealed, there is a difference in sound. So you can actually hear the sound. So if you tap along them, you can hear the difference in sound there as well. So there's a few different ways with these lug lids, especially the one-piece lids that don't have the little pop tops. But this particular batch has the pop tops, which is nice and convenient. It makes it very visually obvious when they are canned correctly, when they have sealed, as to when they haven't. So then I wipe all the jars down to make sure there's no residue on there. If there's any residue on the jars, then you're attracting insects into your pantry, and that's never nice. Or sometimes you get mold on the outside of the jars if it's something that will go moldy. So wipe them down, label them, put them in the pantry. Though I don't think I labelled these ones when I put them in the pantry. But it should be pretty obvious what they are, hopefully, maybe. So this recipe made me 26 jars, so 26 sort of 1 cup-ish size jars, which is a perfect amount really, because it's around about a jar a week for 26 weeks, for 6 months. Some weeks we might not use a jar at all, some weeks we might use 2 jars, but it's approximately 6 months worth of onion jam. So that's not bad going. So maybe next year when onions are in season, or if I can get some really cheap onions again, I might make a double batch, and then that way we've got 12 months, especially if I can get onions in season and cheap. It was about 12 kilos of onions. I think it was a bag and a little bit more that made this up. So yeah, maybe it's worth doing twice the amount, though the time required, it's the caramelization. So the more onions you add to that pot, the longer it's going to take to caramelize it. It's just the way it is. So maybe if I invest in those pots that I'm looking at, and I have 2 pots that are, say, so the buffalo canner is like 30 litres. So if I had 2 23 litres, what I've been looking at, 2 23 litre pots, and I did an amount in each, maybe that would work, because it would only take the same amount of time to caramelize them because I've split it in half. Maybe. We'll see. But doing a year's worth is not a bad idea. If I can get onions that are in season and cheap, then it's worthwhile doing it. The fresh dug onions are always nicer than storage onions, because they don't have anything growing in the middle. They don't have that chance of that slight bitterness from starting to grow. So, and they're normally cleaner, I find, but we'll see anyway when we do it next time. So it works really, for what to use it for, it works really well on hamburgers. I love it on hamburgers. It works really well on pizza, and with your pizza sauce, and then put a bit of the onion jam on the pizza sauce. That's really nice. We like it spread on our bagels, when we have like bacon and eggs on bagels, and then have mayo and onion jam on that. I did use it on the base of a puff pastry quiche in my What We Eat in a Week video, which I'm going to do the voiceover for next, so that'll be up in the next couple of days. And you'll see that I did this puff pastry quiche using the caramelized onion jam as the base layer for it, which was really nice. Everyone really liked that. But you can add it to anything, like a dollop of it added to a pasta sauce is nice, or anything like that. It's really very versatile, and when we have it, we tend to use it in a lot of ways. When we don't have it, I miss it sometimes, but it's, neither here nor there. But then when we have it, I remember how much I like it and how many things I could use it for if I had it all the time. So it is something that I do need to work on having on the shelf all the time. So that was my caramelized onion jam recipe. There is a bunch of recipes online. They are all very similar to what I use. We just do it to taste and, to the size that I want to do it. But because it's a canning recipe, all the recipes are pretty similar. But that's how we do it, and how I do it, and how we enjoy it. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you on the next one. Bye guys.